The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Derek Johnson, CEO of Aurora WDC. My brother Eric happened to be called away from the office here today to a business meeting and has asked me to step in as moderator and organizer on this webinar. I'm so grateful to have my good friend Jason Voyevich and his colleague Dr. Scott Nelson of Logic PD with us this afternoon. Just got off the phone with Alan Michaels as well, one of the organizers of this group, Corporate Planning, Strategy, and Strategic Market Segmentation. And for our topic today, Finding Value at the Edges, a new use for the strategy canvas. I know that we've got two of the industry's experts in this particular area about to share some really valuable thoughts with you. Scott Nelson is Chief Technology Officer and Executive Vice President at Logic PD. He was, prior to that, involved in new product development and R&D for Honeywell, and he holds a PhD in physics from Cornell and a doctoral minor in business administration. Jason Voyevich and I share a commonality in the form of our undergraduate institutional educations coming from UW-Eau Claire here in the central part of Wisconsin. He's got a master's in strategic communication from the University of Minnesota and postgrad at MIT in analytics. As Vice President of Marketing for Logic PD, he works with a number of clients who are looking to hone in on how to create lean new product development and branding operations and apparatuses inside their organizations. So without further ado, Jason, I'll turn it over to you. We are, by the way, accepting questions throughout this first 25 to 30 minutes of Jason and Scott's content delivery. So please submit those via the Q&A pane in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to as many of those in the second half of the hour as possible, folks. So thank you for being with us today. Jason, let's get underway.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Derek. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone on the webinar and who will be listening non-live with us as well. We really appreciate being here in the forum to talk about this. As we go through this, as Eric Johnson and I talked about it a few months ago, I shared with him what we were doing, and as intelligence professionals, our good friends at Aurora, to get some feedback on what was going on. And he mentioned that this might be a great topic for us to discuss where we were at with a broader audience. We wanted that input, those tough questions, and that's really what we're looking at, and that's why there's a question mark behind Strategy Canvas 3.0. We'll go through kind of where we got to this point, and what we think we may have uncovered, a new use for that kind of venerable tool, and we'll see what you guys think. That's really what we're here to do today, is to describe the business opportunity that we faced at Logic PD and how we used and adapted the Strategy Canvas tool to better serve our needs. And we'll go through a little training on how we did it and how it works. And if that's valuable to you in your business and your strategic problem, feel free to steal. This is a place where we're here to share with the intelligence community and other interested parties on what we may have found. So let me get started with a brief agenda. Hold on, we're getting started here. There we go. We'll talk about at a really high level that evolution of the Strategy Canvas tool. Make sure we level set just a bit. We'll talk about our situation, the opportunity we faced, the issues we faced running with what we call Strategy Canvas 1.0 and 2.0. We'll talk a little bit about our adaptation using value chain, more of a value chain analysis. We'll talk about our evidence and our conclusions that we've drawn to this point. So that's a kind of a quick cue up on what we're going to do. So here's where we're at. Here's how we take a look at the evolution of the Strategy Canvas. And for many of you, this should be really old hat. So we remember the Harvard Business Review article. I learned it in grad school. You probably did as well. Where we took a look at, really a visual representation of strategy. And as we all remember before this, what was so valuable about this particular tool is it provided a way for strategy to get out of the boardroom and be a part of kind of the everyday conversation at organizations in a quick, visual, and intuitive way. It's a really powerful tool for that. Taking a look at the classic Southwest Airlines example, this has been used dozens of times. We use it in our own organization, and we'll get to that in a few minutes on how we use it. We move on to really, Kim and moving on to the next iteration of the strategy canvas, really being a bit more descriptive in terms of how we arrange those factors and how we want to focus on creating blue oceans versus red oceans, where we want to create open space in the markets where there are no competitors, and we can compete where there are no competitors, and we can create value in new spaces. And really the question of the day is what's next? And as we use these two tools, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes once we set up our situation, we really found that neither of these tools quite hit the nail on the head for us. We saw the value, we saw the intuitive nature of the visuals, but we didn't see it working quite well for us. And we'll go through that in a couple of minutes, but I think what's important to do before then is give you just a little bit of a background on who Logic PD is and the situation that we faced. So let me turn it over to Dr. Nelson, and as kind of CTO and longtime Logic PD kind of guru, he's probably best equipped to go through a little bit of a very brief history lesson.
Thank you, Jason. I'll start with kind of our brand promise and then give a little bit of a background and a lead up to, as Jason said, to how we came upon this approach. This is our brand promise, helping you launch products that accelerate growth. Logic has done this for over 50 years. We were started by two industrial designers coming out of General Mills. And that's actually a key part of what you will see in the process here is we have a long legacy of user-focused and customer-focused design and user-focused development. And you'll see how that plays into this process in a minute. We actually have design centers, as you can see, across the country, Minneapolis, San Diego, and Boston. And we are a complete product development and manufacturing services organization. So we can go all the way through to fulfillment, starting with a user need. And that also will come to play as you go forward. This is how kind of traditional process looks: discover, design, develop, deliver. When one is developing a new product, Logic integrates these together. We do this all in one place, and we do it concurrently. The concurrence gives one more speed and less risk. And this is what we do every day, and what we have been doing, for 50 years. What's changed recently, and I think a lot of you will be familiar with Internet of Things. This is probably the largest economic opportunity for new product. We actually started seeing this. I first worked on probably my first Internet of Things solution at Honeywell in the mid-90s when I started connecting users to the internet in the control room in oil refineries using Wi-Fi. We were one of the first ones to install Wi-Fi in an oil refinery. But over the last 5 to 10 years, everything has been connected that we develop here at Logic. It's just our normal course of business was working on connected products. But then over the past 3 to 5 years, we started seeing everything looking at subscriptions. And this is where things really got interesting, because now you have the subscription economy. And the subscription economy is, its opportunities are customer relationship, very intimate customer relationships, continuous feedback on product use and customer satisfaction, and of course, recurring revenue. That's why people are excited about it first and foremost, is that you don't sell the product once, you sell it continuously. And so we are looking at, in this space, as a fulfillment provider, how do we transform our business to not only deliver the product, from a design through fulfillment point of view, but how do we deliver the experience all the way to a fulfillment point of view? How do we help our traditional customers who are OEMs deliver this subscription and customer relationship value proposition. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason as to how this question moved us into the next part of the talk.
Right. Well, about 6 months ago, Scott, we found ourselves in the situation where, as on the front end of this economic shift as product developers, we've got folks asking us how we are going to deliver and deploy a subscription product that, as Scott mentioned, is an ongoing revenue stream. That means it's an ongoing value stream. It means that, as Scott mentioned, the opportunity is I don't just sell it once, I sell it every month. Well, therein lies the challenge as well, that I need to deliver value to my customer every month. When she opens that bill, she feels good about paying it. So we looked at that, and we use, the strategy canvas is a core analytical tool in our business. We use it with our vertical market teams to help them define and articulate their strategies in the markets and many other places in our business. So it was a natural first step for us to go and break out the strategy canvas tool. We're quite good at it here, and see how it worked. Now, kind of the issue we faced right away is that the Internet of Things is a really new market. So the competitive factors weren't very clear to us. And we didn't, in an emerging market with new users and new needs, we had a lot of trouble articulating internally as an organization and using this tool to figure out not only what the factors were, but how would you perform against those factors, or how could you perform against those factors. So we made the determination that the Strategy Canvas 1.0, and that's what we're calling this one, it's our name, not theirs, worked very well for existing markets and works really well in areas of our business where there's stability, to really visualize competitive differentiation, but didn't work so well in an emerging market. So we moved on, and we moved to more of we call kind of the blue ocean approach. We might call it Strategy Canvas 2.0, where essentially what we're looking at there is, okay, well, we know this is a new market. There are new opportunities, so we want to create some new space. And really what we found quickly is that it spoke to blue ocean strategy, and for those of you who have read it, most of you I'm sure have, it speaks to kind of those factors and kind of the behavioral chain, and it talks a little bit about that. But as we were using the tool, the core problem we ran into fast was, well, what new space would we create? What are those? There was a need to create open space, but very little direction on how to do that or where to do that, especially in a very new, very different market. So we looked at both of those tools, and neither one of them, the very blunt conclusion is we tried them both. Over about 6 to 9 months ago, we worked with both of them. We implemented some lean, agile strategies, and frankly, they didn't work. They were each of them was really off target. The tools weren't helping us move forward and move the ball forward. So we needed a different approach. We needed that next evolution of the tool. We thought there's value here, but what we weren't seeing is kind of the nuggets in there that would help us move forward. So we worked on a different approach. I'm going to hand it over back to Scott to really describe the process of what we did to do that.
Thank you, Jason. So, we basically kind of went back to our roots. As I said, we're a design-centric organization, and we focus on users. So we kind of said, well, users are where value is created, so let's go back and focus on the users. When we do systems engineering, we have to always include not only the user, but the mission or application when we think about things. So we stepped back and we looked at it from that point of view. And we're in this new space. We looked at our process, our flow, and we said, we've got to add these other segments. We got to add, more complex things in the development cycle. Now we're not done when we manufacture. We now have to have IT infrastructure. We got to have customer fulfillment and customer service. and we have to go all the way to the end of data analytics and application value where things are created. We also looked back to the beginning of the process and said, we had discovered during some of our engagements that customers were really struggling trying to understand the ROI and the business decisions at hand when it didn't just end at the manufacturing point, and it wasn't just a single point of sale. And they struggled there as well. So we mapped out this flow. We said, well, let's keep the order of these things, and let's take a look at what we see. And we looked at, okay, what's the value of these steps? And we have the ability to do this because we do many of these steps. So we have things like supplier, as a system integrator, we see supplier costs, and we know enough to understand margins and value. We have our own margins and our own billing multiples for our own teams. And we know that designers tend to have much higher billing multiples than layout designers or layout engineers. That there's things at the edges that we saw had much higher value. And data analytics, the people that had the domain knowledge to convert data to information. So we saw this value at the edges in our extended IoT development process. So we then said, well, what if we looked at it from our user's point of view again, and our customers' point of view, and we looked at the flow of data in these IoT applications. And you start with, I got to capture data, and I got to capture the right data. Then I transmit the data, I collect and organize and provide access in the cloud, and then I analyze and I convert and I present that information for action. Right? And so we said, this what happens with this flow? And we say, well, we know a lot about this flow. Let's just look at the gross margins of what have to, of putting this particular product or solution value chain together. And this is what we see. This is what we see in terms of gross margin across stage. So then we have one other thought that Jason's team does a lot of market intelligence. We're always watching the market, and we said, what if we looked at multiples? And so we took a look. There's a lot of companies that are moving in the M&A space in IoT right now, and there's even those that are commenting about, they're comparing it to .com and so on and so forth. So we said, well, let's take a look at, we can map, now that we know what we're doing as a provider here, we can map these companies into the flow. And when we did that and we looked at multiples, lo and behold, we saw a familiar shape again. And this was actually it was kind of enlightening and comforting both, because we now had looked at 3 separate approaches, very different approaches, 2 completely different breakdowns of process. One was a development process, the other is a delivery process, essentially, for a value proposition in IoT. And we see a pattern. And I come from back my time at Honeywell. I did pattern, we do pattern identification, pattern recognition, and usually you're doing pattern recognition to find targets. Well, our target here, of course, is strategic value. And so we find this pattern, and it's identifying strategic value. So we went through this process, and we said, what did we learn? Values created at the edges, and not surprisingly, it's also lost in the middle as things mature. So I think this was kind of the conclusion, and I'll turn it back over to Jason to kind of sum up and move on.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, if we kind of loop back to the beginning, kind of where we were and what we found, we had Strategy Canvas 1.0 that, we would call descriptive. It's visual, it's descriptive, it describes what is or what could be, depending on how you use the tool. As we move to, Strategy Canvas 2.0, we'd call it actionable. That it's something, it's very action oriented versus simply being descriptive. It layers on top of that, what the actions you must take are. It forces strategic choices in order to create. The implication is you must make a trade-off. You need to eliminate other things in order to create new ones. So in that way, it creates that kind of action framework. What we looked at, and very humbly would prescribe and would submit to you as the group, is Strategy Canvas 3.0. That it is a descriptive or a prescriptive tool rather than simply a descriptive tool. When taking a look at, well, where should that competitive differentiation occur? So in essence, breaking it down into a how-to guide on what we did. Okay? So essentially, we are plotting against the x-axis the value chain stages, and whatever those may be for a particular market. Now, we did this with ours. We have not done this with others. That'd be a interesting kind of next step here, is for other people to take a look at those value chain stages and map that measurable external value, whether that be whether qualitative data or quantitative data on margin or perception or multiples, and to see if we see a similar, if others doing this see a similar curve to this one. We feel this one is still simple, it's still visual. You could certainly plot on top of this current performance and see how well you are aligned. That's how we used it, frankly, at Logic. We looked at how our business was aligned to this particular curve and found very quickly that places where we were too heavy in the middle needed to be redirected out towards the edges in order to drive maximum shareholder and maximum customer value. So it is, in that way, a prescriptive tool to tell us where are we going to find the value, and then even possibly moving backwards and using Strategy Canvas 2.0 to get more specific about how we may do that. So we really do feel, though, as though we are kind of showing a 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. We don't necessarily feel as though this supplants any one of those other tools. That this is an additional analytical mechanism to help those who may be struggling in the same way we were to find that prescriptive value. So as I kind of wrap up here and turn it back over to the group for their comments and their thoughts, really some key questions that I'd like to seed the discussion with today. A few things. First is something Eric Johnson and I at Aurora talked about is when we take a look at multiples, for instance, is this really an artifact of investment community and their excitement and where they more easily see value than in others? Or is it something more than that? Frankly, is this an artifact of this particular space in IoT or M2M? It's an immature market. Is it an artifact of that? Frankly, number three, are the conclusions actionable? In other words, does it always make sense for companies to focus on the edges, or is it an informative tool only? Frankly, as we've alluded to a bit before, can we more broadly generalize? We've done it for our particular market in this particular space, but does it work with other value chains? I'd be curious to see if we see the same thing. And frankly, what haven't we thought of? When we take a look at this, it was helpful in our business and it helped guide our strategy. But to use this as a broader tool, is there additional insight from the group that that you could bring to us that as we bring this out as as an intelligence community, what other things do you see that might be things to think about? And we want to create a very open, we're very open to that. We're putting it out there. I wouldn't say half-baked, but I would certainly say early stage for early comment. So that's where I'll leave this up on the screen here. You certainly don't need to see our pictures on the next page. But I'd like to open it back up. So I'm going to turn it back over to kind of bring Derek and Eric, if possible, back onto the phone to to kind of begin to moderate some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. This is Derek speaking. I've got a couple of questions already in the queue here from Rebecca. First of all, she asked, "What is IoT? Can you describe what that stands for?"
Yeah, this is Scott. So Internet of Things is a term that's pretty widely used right now for the connection of devices into what is often referred to as the cloud, or think of it as the connection of devices into systems from which you can get access anywhere. So Cisco, GE, IBM, all of the big brands are talking about connecting everything in the world, everything there is, everything in your world to the internet, essentially into the infrastructure, and then providing access to both those devices and to information generated by those devices. You'll hear the word mashing a lot about connecting information that might already exist in the internet. Think of weather data, and you connect that with data coming from sensors in your yard that are moisture sensors, and you will make forward-looking decisions about whether or not to turn on the water in the sprinkler system. That's one of millions of examples today that are coming up with connecting sensors and wireless connectivity devices into the physical things of our world and the living things of our world, quite honestly, with devices like Fitbit. Fitbit is a very popular Internet of Things device in the dialogue, because it's, I'm wearing one, Jason's wearing one. It keeps track of what we do, and it gives us value in helping us understand if we're living a healthy lifestyle to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then M2M, machine to machine, I assume, is kind of takes me back a couple years personally to an announcement that was made, I believe, at the Consumer Electronics Show. Now, this is now at least 3 or 4 years ago, but they came out with this pill bottle dispenser. Maybe a better term is a dispenser for multiple pills that you can give to your elderly parent or grandparent. Have that connected to the Internet of Things in this sense, and then the kids and grandkids can observe from a distance whether or not that parent or grandparent is taking their right medicines, and it goes based upon a connection and assumingly some weight parameter or measurement of weight that's left in that pill bottle at the end of the day. And I just find the advancements in technology that are out there, and of course we just had CES in the very recent past. I just find that the advancements out there are amazing when you kind of sit back and say, how far has this world really come in the last 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, M2M was kind of the first moniker, so to speak. And I think what people have found, particularly those in marketing and strategy, is that M2M was kind of constrictive because it made people only think about machines talking to machines, which of course occurs in terms of the movement of digital data, but the value always comes from the people. So the Internet of Things, the word internet allows individuals to immediately think about connecting themselves to the information, even though there's still a lot of machine-to-machine stuff going on, but the focus, I think, is better placed.
Mm-hmm. Second question from Rebecca. How do you measure strategic value at a headline?
Say it again.
How do you measure strategic value at a headline? And Rebecca, I don't know if you have anything more to go on there, but this question came in about 10 minutes ago. I don't know if it was related to a certain slide. Measuring strategic.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the headline comment, but measuring strategic value, one of the ways we do that, in a corporate sense, is looking at the value that we have, to users. So there's adoption and there's price, there's margin, there's quantification of value. But strategic value should be more about, more like valuation, more like corporate value. It could be social value. I work with a group over at the U that does social entrepreneurship, and we judge plans based on their social value as well as their economic strategic value. But the metrics that have a longer view in time and have I would say, a forward-looking view in time are things that I would call strategic value.
And she
I guess
clarified,
growth.
and thank you, Rebecca, for clarifying a little bit. So she clarifies and says, what are the key drivers of strategic value in your 3.0 model?
Yeah, so they are going to be the things like margin. They're going to be the ability to, to capture more of the value of the stage. So margins in manufacturing are significantly lower than margins at the business consulting end, where you help customers make decisions. Application level, the margins are much higher, and then the other kind of key thing is growth. Now, if you look at the chain, the whole chain will move, but parts of the value chain will grow much faster, both in terms of companies that are participating and as well as the size of the companies that are doing well. So growth is a key strategic value measure in our view of the tool.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, plenty of time for Q&A here, so let's keep putting them into the questions panel on your GoToWebinar control panel out there. One thing I continually look at, guys, Jason and Scott, is it feels like it's easier to apply many of these principles, whether they be intelligence or applied analytics or other things, when you have a more tangible product, something you can touch. When you think about professional services, for instance, let's take the tax and accounting industry. I suppose you end up with a tax return or something that is tangible on paper, so to speak, but it's less touchable, if you get where I'm going. It's not that MRI machine. It's not that GPS unit. It's not, that, fancy TV that you can buy off the shelf and put in your home that connects everything in one fell swoop. How is potentially the application of your model very different for a softer, less tangible industry such as professional services as compared to some of the more, even bricks and mortar or kind of tangible product classifications?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's one that we asked ourselves, because we are in the professional services business as well as the manufacturing of physical things business. My answer to it would be actually to think about it at the offering level, to think about, to put yourself first in your customer's shoes and say, okay, what does my customer see and what does my customer value? And then it's about this process flow. So then I would back up from there and say, okay, what are all the things that I have to do in order to deliver that value? And I would, I have to gather this information. Do I have, who do I have to, with whom do I have to partner, or from whom do I have to buy along the way? Part of what we like about the tool is that we can think about the delivery of a given offering from its instantiation to its finality, and then make decisions about the steps along the way. When you're physically building something, you have supply chain segments, but as you can see, when we move to something that basically is viewed via software, we still had key supplier segments that had to be identified in the flow of the offering through the process. And so that, in some sense, is what is new here, is that by putting the flow of value through the strategy canvas, it gave our teams an easier, a little bit easier tool to use in terms of identifying what they do on each step along the way, with whom do they compete, and how do they compete in each step of the way. And I believe that can be done, for something like accounting services or tax services, the same as it's done for product development services, if one thinks about the steps along the way.
Well, you shared, I think it was on your slide 18, Jason, that being able to measure margin multiples, or the multiples that need to be applied to a designer relative to a manufacturing engineer, for instance, the differentials, and then being able to take those inputs and plot out where you can find that value at the edge. I found that pretty interesting myself too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's let's let's kind of jump back there real quick. I think this is slide 18, Derek. I don't think this is quite what you had in mind.
Yeah, it just gives you a sense for what some of the players, at least in Logic's ecosystem, you all are taking a look at, and the opportunity to measure and align with what some of the other players are doing out there. I've always found that benchmarking well outside of your or one specific niche industry is often really valuable. Being able to find that kind of, I think your stage 2 model had a photo of the Blue Ocean book that was up there at one point on your slides there too, Jason, and being able to take your mindset and extend it well beyond what the kind of traditional industry that you might operate in says you should do, and learn from those adjacencies that can, in a lot of ways, force some different strategic choice opportunities in your I guess your portfolio as well.
You know, one thing that I might kind of bring us back to, even kind of jumping back a little further, where we really take a look at, well, what is the model really of this, and how new really is the subscription economy? And as Scott and I have talked about it with our teams here, and as we've worked on our strategy, you know, the subscription economy is not a new concept. You know, when you think about telecommunications and you think about, you know, AT&T and Verizon and Comcast, these are 30-year-old, 40-year-old models. When you think about business value and the delivery of value, and frankly, we found it, you know, kind of from an adjacent market perspective, we found it much more valuable to think about what we did, or what we do, frankly, as more akin to what Comcast will do. And that is, we're delivering a pipe through which we are generating and delivering valuable content. So yes, there's hardware involved that people interact with, and you know, that's valuable. On the other side, the content that people are watching, in this Netflix example, the content is king here in terms of where the value is. And frankly, everything in the middle is really, it's kind of a lot like talking with IT folks. They kind of bemoan the fact that when everything works, no one says anything. But the minute something goes down, there's howling. And you know, we learn that it's a tough place to be from a kind of middle of the road perspective, where value is destroyed in the middle. So we felt like, you know, this was kind of that key adjacency we looked at for how do we really want to think about this, and that's been more useful to our thinking than really even looking at the kind of traditional product development process. And frankly, the value chain analysis, you know, led us right back to I remember when the first time we looked at it, we said, well, gosh, this is just what Netflix does. You know, this is how they must look at it. And that was a real epiphany for us.
Mm-hmm. So having watched Blockbuster have some of the challenges that they had recently, what if you were advising Netflix's management on their model, what types of things would you say they ought to be watching for, or opportunities that they perhaps could take advantage of? Anything come to mind while you're driving at that example, Jason?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. If we use the same kind of thought process that value is created on the edges, you know, where is the edge value for Netflix? And it's really two things then. On the kind of the left edge, that's the devices through which you consume Netflix content. So, you know, that's making sure that Netflix works seamlessly on an iPad or a Galaxy S5 that just came out. So it's kind of continuing to develop the really seamless user experience on the left end of the value curve. And then over on the right, which is that kind of that delivery of ongoing value, that's really the continued negotiation that they do, and that's really probably Netflix's biggest competitive threat is copyright, and you know, folks deciding they're not getting enough value from Netflix, and you know, they have to work at both edges. but really you see Netflix mitigating that through the development of its own content, frankly, and developing its own creative to be able to mitigate the loss of one particular piece of intellectual property by creating its own. So you can see them kind of integrating that value chain, and I would argue that their development of their own content is a statement on maximizing the right end of the value chain, where that's created at that edge.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Jason. As soon as you asked the question, the first thing I thought about was House of Cards. And the interesting thing is the parties in the middle in this play, have been struggling over the past few weeks. The Verizons and the Comcasts of the world who own the pipe. And as many people know watching the news, they have enough strength in the middle. The middle isn't a place you can't make money. It's just a place that, has less value. Netflix, by creating their own content, created a demand that the people in the middle said, hey, we should be getting a bigger portion of this than we are, right? And they constricted the pipe. Those of us who watch House of Cards had to wait for buffering and complained, and and Netflix made a deal. But the strategy that from our point of view, the strategy Netflix was, took when they moved to to creating content was a recognition that, that other edge of that value chain where the content is created is a place where, to which we should pay attention, and they took action. And to be honest, it probably, has done way more for them than the library of other content that they have, just from a brand point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question in from Scott here. He says this model reminds him of Stan Shih's, S-H-I-H is the last name, smiley curve. His explanation of the disaggregation of the PC industry. Do you believe that might be a correct observation?
I'm not familiar with that. Are you familiar with that particular paper?
No, I'm not. Can you spell that again for me, Derek?
So Stan, S-T-A-N, and the last name is spelled S-H-I-H, and Scott references something called the smiley curve in regards to his explanation of the disaggregation of the PC industry.
I have a suspicion it probably is very similar, because if one thinks about the hardware in a PC and the value chain use of creating it to using it, the edges are going to be, in my quick thought about it, the edges are going to be content, which is going to be all about application and content at the user level and ease of use. So you could go all the way to Apple and their approach to ease of use as a computer company versus many of the other PCs. The other side of it, Jason just pulled it up here, so we're looking production chain time. Yeah, it's very similar. He's looking at it very much from a product development and value chain point of view. We're looking at it. Manufacturing's in the middle. Distribution and marketing. Distribution is something that the internet has decreased its value to some extent, but physical distribution still is very important, i.e. Amazon. So yes, I would say this is very similar to what we're looking at. Haven't seen this before though.
Yeah, one thing that strikes me that something that looking at it from the production chain, I think I agree that this is a great this is a great way to look at it that came to a similar conclusion. I think the minor, perhaps a distinction without a difference, but I don't think it is, that instead of the production chain necessarily, we're really looking at it from the customer's value chain point of view. So not necessarily the kind of the inside out look, we're looking at it outside in. And we came to a very similar conclusion. But I think for instance, in Netflix's case, looking at it in this way, I'm not sure would necessarily kind of generate the same kind of curve than if you looked at it from where do they touch the user. And again, I think in both cases you see, something similar in terms of the conclusion, but I think there will be some value in looking at this very much from the customer's point of view versus the producer's point of view, and I think that's an important distinction. I think that as we take a look at other industries and other places where, for instance, with McDonald's Corp, they were a proponent 40 years ago of moments of truth, and looking at that, we may see different in that kind of a service business, because they're not really selling hamburgers, they're selling a service. You may see a different kind of curve happen. It may not necessarily be a smiley face curve. There may be really key points in the middle that are more spiky. We may see a spike in the middle of that curve. And I think those are, when you look at it that way and you think about it from the customer's point of view, I think you're going to see, I think you won't get stuck in the, well, this is how we look at it and this is kind of the outside, inside out. We want to make sure we're looking at it. I think the prescription for this tool is that we look outside in.
I think the other quick comment about the curve is, and it highlights an aspect of this approach, when one takes a systems view and a flow view, there's always, you can pick your stopping points. So in the use of computers, for example, I could extend the curve that we found here to the use of the application. This curve is this particular analysis was very hardware oriented. It looks like it basically was this would be something that a PC manufacturer, this is how they would look at their existing business. This is part of what we did, though. We said, okay, here's what we do today, and we looked at the tools, and it didn't really help us take us to where we needed to go in the future. So when we extended our curve, I go back, I'm going the wrong way. If I extend my curve, we extended our curve to include the delivery. We had to extend our view, right? We had to step back. So if this PC manufacturer stepped back and said, okay, but who else is making money off the PC? Who else is, who's selling applications? Who's streaming content? And how much value are those people making relative to this curve? I could argue that this curve would basically become flat if one were to map the streaming of content and the applications that, on the same curve. And that's where I think it gets interesting, is if you say, okay, this is what it looks like today. That's what we did. What does it look like if we encapsulate the entire user experience? And what does the flow look like, and what does the value look like? And once again, the edges, are important, but they also become relative to edges in subsegments of the flow.
Very good. Another good question in from Rebecca. What would you say is the single biggest shift in thinking and action when you move up to 3.0, which she summarizes here that she believes that 3.0 model was more or less summed up as a subscription model. Is that accurate?
Well, that's how we came to it. I think this comment about the she smile curve is interesting, because part of the first action that I think is really interesting is to make sure that you move back to a point of view that encapsulates the entire value chain from the user's perspective. So you may not get all the way to the user with whatever your offering is, but the first thing that we did was, we were now, if you think about this chart that's up on 14, previously our offering kind of ended at the manufacturing services level where we delivered the product. But we stepped back and looked at the value chain from the user's point of view of that product, and we saw these other steps along the way. And then when we looked at the value the user rewarded the providers of those steps, we say, hey, there's a lot more value farther down towards the user. And that is probably, the thing that changed the way our thinking thinking. Everything we look at with every strategy, with every offering, we start with what initiates the offering, what initiates the the ability to create the offering, all the way to the delivery of the offering, and make sure that we understand the value of the steps in between. And I think that's applicable to any offering. Anybody who has an offering that they're looking at, they have the ability. If you are manufacturing or delivering an offering, I believe you will have the ability to break it down, and then once you break it down, you can look at, particularly in today's world of outsourced services, you have the ability to look at the multiples, and the value of the suppliers at each step of the chain.
Right. Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great slide on 14. How would you say those conversations with, with respect to doing your market intel collection and analysis to indicate that you ought to be providing those extra value layers to your, at least Logic's clients and customers in that sense? Are those conversations easy ones to have, in way of?
I'll show you the slide that matters to those questions. It's this one. When you're talking to shareholders about this process and you show them this one, things move along quickly. Mm-hmm. Because this is about valuation.
Yeah, so in other words, we have, part of the kind of that core question, how do we transform our business? And really, it's the prescription for us was pretty simple. It said we need to we need to deliver products and services that get closer and closer to our customer's customer, and continue to push out towards the edges and push towards where the value and the valuation is. And that's really kind of how I sum it up is, all right, where do we go? And, from a corporate perspective, we are generating maximum value for our shareholders. That is our number one objective. And this one is a prescription on where to find it. Now, we still need to look at each of these. Just because we know where to look doesn't mean you'll necessarily find it. But it does point you to the place where, if you spend a lot of time on the network and the cloud, we got news for you. They will commoditize over time. If we looked at a temporal chart, we would see that network and cloud have been decreasing in valuation over time because these services are becoming more and more commoditized. But what can never and will never be commoditized is the creativity and the energy out at the edge where the customer lives. As human beings live out there, and they don't behave you like you'd like them to behave. And it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, it's difficult, but that's where the value is. And it tells us, it makes sure that we as an organization understand where to put our focus and where to put our limited resources.
Yeah. I think the key comment to that last statement, Jason, we use all three tools still today. We don't replace 1 and 2 with 3 completely, because particularly the blue ocean, which forces you to think about the trade-offs of the value of the things the things upon which you're going to compete in any given stage, is still a valuable exercise. So 3.0 helps us focus on, okay, where do we need to be moving? Where do we need to create? And where do we need to compete? We might come back to blue ocean to say, okay, who competes out here? What do they do? What do they do within that segment of the value chain? And blue ocean then becomes a second iteration in the strategic planning process to help us figure out how to capture more value on the edges. So hopefully that's one thing we didn't state explicitly, but I think is important to state. We aren't saying this is an evolution. It's not like iOS 7 that replaces iOS 6. This is 3, which augments the previous 2. I think is kind of a key observation.
No, absolutely. So that takes us through the final questions we've got submitted through the GoToWebinar pane. Jason and Scott, I got brought into this at the last minute, covering for Eric, as I mentioned at the start of our discussion here today. I just want to thank you. I've really enjoyed watching this and observing the presentation that you provided today to our group. Alan Michaels, if you're out there and care to say a few words, I'll invite you to do that now. If not,
thank you very much. Yes, Scott and Jason, I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation on behalf of the Corporate Planning, Strategy, and Strategic Market Segmentation Group. And I also want to thank all the people for joining in today's call. Fantastic.
and in the purest sense of the phrase finding value at the edges, we'll take the final 4 or 5 minutes that were budgeted toward this meeting and give them back to you. So I hope that you'll watch the continuous thread on the group that Alan just illustrated for us, and watch for the upcoming webinars. I know Eric and Alan intend to bring you all. Jason and Scott, can't thank you enough for sharing this important story with us today. We appreciate it very much.
No, we appreciate it as well. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Eric Johnson, as well, and all our friends at Aurora for putting this on and giving us a forum to speak with all of you today. We appreciate the great insights and continued refinement in our thinking. So this is exactly what we had hoped to get out of this as well.
Real good. Have a great rest of your day and week, everyone. We'll be looking forward to talking with you again real soon. Jason and Scott, thanks once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.